The EPA is moving forward. It is making its own plans to regulate GHG emissions. And to that end, today we saw the first hearing on the so-called tailoring rule. This is one that would allow EPA to use the Clean Air Act to regulate GHGs from sources emitting more than 25,000 tons of CO2 a year. Clean Skies Dan Goldstein was at that meeting in Virginia today. And Dan, let's be clear, this is the stick in the stick and carrot approach from the Obama administration, correct?
Exactly, Tyler. And this whole tailoring rule stems from the landmark Supreme Court decision in 2007, in which the court told the EPA, yes, you can regulate greenhouse gas emissions using the Clean Air Act. The problem, as many see it, was the statutory language of the act, which said anything emitting as little as 100 tons a year of pollutants must be regulated. Well, that, of course, prompted fears that everything from backyard cookouts to mom and pop donut shops would face government regulation. So with this rule, the EPA came up with this 25,000 ton per year threshold, which they say will keep the mom and pop businesses out of the government's eye. And we heard today dozens of comments on the proposed rule. Environmentalists, of course, like the Sierra Club, naturally are pleased that the Obama administration is acting on greenhouse gas emissions, something they say the Bush administration failed to do after being handed the Supreme Court ruling. But some business groups are still worried that the EPA will start at that 25,000 number and work its way down.
We believe that the rule which EPA is proposing will, for the first time, make sure that the power plants, the oil refineries, the cement kilns, the steel mills, which are responsible for 70% of America's stationary greenhouse pollutants, will be subject to Clean Air Act regulation and will need to clean up their pollution. So we think this is the right approach for EPA to take. We think it's the approach the Clean Air Act mandates, and we think it's the approach the Supreme Court told EPA almost 2 years ago it needed to follow. One of the nice things about having a new administration in Washington is this one seems to be willing to follow the law.
Small business is going to get roped into this entire process, entire regulatory process. EPA is now starting the regulations on greenhouse gases. They're going to start with cars. Once they start with cars, it means that greenhouse gases are regulated pollutants under the Clean Air Act. And EPA is now trying to craft a way that is what they perceive to be less onerous, but they even EPA recognizes that small businesses are going to get roped in because of the car rule into greenhouse gas control under the Clean Air Act.
Now here in Washington, Tyler, nothing, of course, occurs in a political vacuum. We've heard members of Congress, such as Senator Lindsey Graham of South Dakota, say that if Congress doesn't act on regulating greenhouse gases, then the EPA will. And under this proposed rule, which could be finalized by March after all the comments are in, comes just as Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said that's the week he expects the Senate will get around to a floor vote on some kind of climate change legislation. So nothing like a loaded regulatory gun to get your attention, Tyler.
Yeah, good point, Dan. By the way, Lindsey Graham, South Carolina. Just want to make sure we got that clear. Quick question for you, though. We've heard time and again from the Obama administration that it prefers legislation before regulation. Did you hear that note sounded again at today's hearing?
Well, interesting you mentioned that, Tyler, because the way the environmentalists put it was they say the two can work in conjunction. Of course, they say, look, the Clean Air Act was given to us by Congress. Congress knows what it wanted. They knew what they wanted us to do, and that's what we're going to do first. So you can say that the Obama administration, obviously, like you said, wants the carrot and the stick. But the industry, of course, would like to have the legislative side, at least a crack at the legislative side. That's where they think, obviously, they can get their best deal, Tyler.
All right, Dan Goldstein reporting. Thank you very much.